It was a cold Tuesday morning when the email came. I was in the middle of finalizing a budget report, my hands still half numb from the drafty office air. The subject line was short and cold. Termination notice. I remember the exact words. They use sterile corporate speak meant to sound gentle. We regret to inform you. I read it again and again, each line of polite detachment feeling like a slap across the face. After 10 years of loyalty, 10 years of late nights and early mornings, they were done with me. Just like that, I took a long breath and stared at my reflection in the office window. My hair was thinner now, and there were lines around my mouth I hadn't noticed before. I wasn't some kid fresh out of college anymore. I was a middle-aged man who had staked his identity on this job on, being the reliable one, the steady one. And suddenly, that was gone. I called my wife as soon as I stepped outside, my voice shaking more than I wanted it to. But she didn't answer. I tried again, and again. Finally, I sent a text. I need to talk to you. I lost my job. No response. When I got home, the door was locked. My key still worked, but the living room was empty, her usual scent of vanilla candles gone. The little things she used to scatter. Around the place all packed up, her shoes were missing from the entryway. The only thing left was a note on the kitchen counter. I'm done. Don't call me. I stood there for what felt like forever, holding that single scrap of paper in my hands. My world didn't just collapse, it disintegrated piece by piece. I called her one last time, thinking maybe this was some sort of mistake. Maybe she was just angry and needed time, but she had blocked me. I couldn't even hear her voice to know why. The days that followed were a blur of half-empty coffee cups and endless job applications. I felt like I was walking through a fog, each rejection email pushing me deeper into it. But it wasn't just the job. It was her silence, how it cut deeper than any layoff notice ever could. I kept telling myself she'd come around, that this was just a bad moment. But as weeks turned into months, it became clear she was gone. She'd chosen to vanish from my life at the exact moment I needed her most. That hurt worse than losing any job, standing in the wreckage of what used to be my life. I realized I wasn't just mourning the loss of a paycheck, I was mourning the betrayal of someone who had promised to be there through thick and thin. Ex-wife didn't just leave. She locked the door behind her and threw away the key. And in that silence, in that sudden emptiness, I found a new resolve taking shape, a quiet fury that told me I wasn't done yet. I'd always prided myself on being the calm one, the guy who could keep his head when everything around him was on fire, but that calm had deserted me in those first few weeks. My nights were long, spent staring at the ceiling in the darkness, replaying every conversation we'd ever had, looking for some clue I'd missed. My days weren't much better. I'd put on a brave face for interviews. But inside I felt like a ghost haunting my own life. I kept replaying it, her vanishing act. The way she didn't even have the decency to look me in the eye as she left. What had I missed? Was there someone else? Was it me? The questions were a constant. Low hum in the back of my mind, I started digging through the small things she'd left behind. A half-empty bottle of her shampoo, an old birthday card she'd given me, the faded sweater she used to wear on cold mornings. They were relics, reminders of a life that felt like it belonged to someone else. And that's when the pieces started falling into place. Little things that at first didn't seem like much. The way she'd suddenly started working late in those last months, the phone she always kept face down on the table, the new perfume I'd never smelled on her before. They all felt like puzzle pieces scattered on the floor, taunting me with a picture I couldn't quite see. One night, found myself scrolling through her old social media posts, looking for some sign of what had really been going on. When I saw it, a photo from a company event I'd never even heard of. She was there, laughing with a group of people I didn't recognize. And there he was, tall, confident, a smile that looked just a little too familiar. I didn't want to jump to conclusions. Maybe it was nothing. But that photo burned itself into my mind, and the more I looked at it, the more I knew. My gut had always been reliable, and it was screaming at me that this was more than just a bad breakup. There's something else. There's something she hadn't wanted me to see. I spent hours combing through what little I could find online, piecing together a story that was starting to make my stomach turn. She'd been working for a new consulting firm for months, something she'd barely mentioned to me, always brushing it off as just a side project. But the more I looked, the clearer it became. She wasn't just working late. She was building a new life without me. Every night, I'd tell myself I was done, that I needed to let it go and move on. But then, I'd see that photo again, or find another snippet of conversation in some forgotten email thread, and the questions would start all over. It felt like I was chasing shadows, but I couldn't stop. I tried reaching out to a couple of her old colleagues, but they were cagey, almost nervous. One of them told me in hushed tones that she'd been really close with her new boss, closer than anyone else in the office. The words hit me like a punch in the gut. I thanked him, but as I hung up the phone, I could feel the rage bubbling up again. I didn't want to believe it. I didn't want to be that guy, the one who couldn't let go, who was stuck in the past. But the more I dug, the more the truth seemed to shimmer just out of reach. Like something underwater at night, I'd find myself pacing the apartment, my thoughts swirling in circles. My friends tried to help, telling me to focus on finding a new job to move forward. But how could I? How could I pretend it was just about losing work when everything I thought I knew about my life was unraveling? Sometimes I wondered if I was making it all up, if I was seeing ghosts where there were none. But deep down I knew there was something there, something she was hiding. And it wasn't just about another man. It was about how easily she'd erased me from her life like I was nothing more than an inconvenience. I didn't have all the proof yet, but I could feel it in my bones. This wasn't just about a marriage ending. It was about betrayal. It's about someone I'd trusted with my heart turning around and throwing it away. And that knowledge was like a splinter under my skin. One I couldn't ignore, no matter how hard I tried. I was done feeling sorry for myself. The sadness was still there. Of course, how could it not be? But it had started to curdle into something sharper, something that felt a little like purpose. I stopped sleeping in late, started treating every day like a mission. My friends didn't see the change at first, but I could feel it in my bones. I was done being the man who got left behind. I wanted the truth, and I wanted it in black and white. It started with the bank statements. I'd never paid much attention to the small charges that showed up each month. The lunches, she said, were with the team. Ubers she never mentioned. But now I combed through every line like a detective. That's when I found it. A series of payments to a fancy downtown restaurant I'd never heard of. Dinners that didn't line up with any work events I knew she had. I highlighted them in red and kept going. Emails were next. Still had access to the joint account we'd used for bills, and she'd never bothered to change the password. It felt wrong at first, like I was invading her privacy, but that feeling didn't last long. I found emails from her new boss, casual, familiar, with little inside jokes tucked in between talk of budgets and deliverables. It was the tone that got to me. The way he wrote to her was nothing like how you'd write to a subordinate, and the way she responded, like she was already gone from me. One night, I found a thread that left no doubt. They were planning a weekend trip, some leadership retreat, he called it. She had told me she was working overtime that weekend, but there it was in plain text. Hotel confirmations, dinner reservations for 2. My hand shook as I read it, the words blurring together. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it would burst. That was the moment everything shifted. My grief turned to something else, a cold, focused determination. I was done being in the dark. If she was going to erase me, I was going to make damn sure I saw every step of how she did it. I started copying everything, emails, receipts, calendar invites. I didn't know what I was going to do with it yet, but I knew I had to have it. Felt like gathering ammunition, like I was finally taking back a little control in a world that had felt so unsteady. I kept it quiet. Even my closest friends didn't know how deep I was digging. They still thought I was just trying to move on. But late at night, when the apartment was silent, I was piecing together a puzzle that showed exactly how little I had mattered to her. I reached out to an old friend of mine, Mark, who had always been good at reading between the lines. He worked in it, and he owed me a favor from years back. I didn't tell him everything, just enough to get his help. He showed me how to pull up metadata on the emails, how to see if she'd been using cloud storage. I didn't know about it. It was like lifting a veil. I found files she'd tucked away, presentations she'd put together for the new boss, strategy notes that had nothing to do with the job she'd told me she had. She'd been working for him for longer than I thought. It wasn't just a fling it was a whole other life she'd been building behind my back. The worst part wasn't the cheating, it was how easily she'd let me become irrelevant. She'd been rewriting the story of her life while I was still living in the last chapter. Every time I found something new, the hurt was there, but so was a sense of clarity. I wasn't crazy, I wasn't paranoid. I was seeing the truth for what it was, and that gave me strength I hadn't felt in months. I started thinking about what I wanted out of all this. Revenge. Maybe, but more than that, I wanted to stand in the light of the truth. I wanted her to know I saw her for who she really was. I wanted him to see me, too, the man she'd tried to erase. I was careful. I didn't confront her. Not yet. I knew if I moved too soon, she'd just find a way to spin it, make me look like the bitter ex-husband who couldn't let go. No, I was going to be smarter than that. I started documenting everything, making copies, storing them in places she couldn't touch. I even reached out to a lawyer just to see what my options might be. I wasn't sure if I wanted to blow it all up publicly, but I wanted to know my rights. The emotional struggle was real. Some nights I'd still wake up gasping, my mind replaying old memories of us laughing in the kitchen or curled up on the couch. But those memories felt like someone else's life now. The man I was becoming didn't have time for nostalgia. He had work to do. I didn't know exactly how this was going to end, but for the first time in months, I felt like I had a direction. It's like I wasn't just drifting in the wake of someone else's choices. I was charting my own course, one email, one bank statement at a time. I could feel the power shifting, and it was a quiet, electric feeling, like standing at the edge of a storm. Knowing it was finally my turn to bring the thunder, the day I decided to confront her, I woke up before the sun. The world outside was quiet, that moment of stillness before the city starts to hum. I stood by the window, watching the pale light push the night away, and I felt something hard and steady settle in my chest. No more second guessing. No more endless questions. I called Mark early. "It's time," I said, my voice calm, controlled. He knew what I meant. We'd spent weeks pulling together the evidence, sorting it into a story no one could deny. It was all there, the emails, the hotel receipts, the bank statements, everything laid out in cold, unforgiving detail. We met in a small cafe near her new office, the kind of place with too bright lights and bad coffee. Mark handed me a folder, thick and heavy. "This is it," he said. "Are you sure?" I nodded, more than I've ever been. I waited until just after lunch to head to her office. I wanted her to be caught off guard, to see me not as the man she'd abandoned, but as the man who wasn't going to be silent anymore. The receptionist gave me a polite smile. "Do you have an appointment?" "No," I said, my voice steady. "Tell her it's urgent." She looked at me. Maybe she saw something in my eyes, because she didn't argue. A minute later, she led me to a sleek conference room with glass walls and a long table that gleamed under the fluorescent lights. And there she was. She looked up, her expression flickering from surprise to irritation. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her tone clipped, controlled. She was wearing a navy blue dress, her hair pulled back in a style I'd always loved. But today, all I saw was the mask she wore to keep her secrets hidden. I set the folder down in front of her and met her eyes. "I think you know." She hesitated for a moment, just a flicker of uncertainty in her gaze before she picked up the folder and flipped it open. I watched her face as she read the dinner receipts, the hotel confirmations, the emails. Her hands started to tremble. "You went through my stuff?" she hissed, her voice low, almost venomous. "You left me no choice," I said. My voice was calm, but inside I was a storm. "You didn't just walk away from our marriage. You lied. You built a life behind my back." You thought I'd just roll over and let it happen." She pushed the folder away, her jaw tight. "This is none of your business anymore. We're done." "That's where you're wrong," I said. "You made it my business the moment you started using our shared resources to fund your affair. The moment you turned me into the fool everyone else was laughing at." She stood up, her chair scraping across the floor. "Act!" she spat. "Digging through my past because you can't let go?" I leaned back in my chair, a small smile playing at the edges of my lips. "I'm not here to beg for you to come back," I said quietly. "I'm here to make sure you can't pretend anymore. I know everything, and so does he." Her eyes widened, then just a fraction, but enough. "What do you mean?" Her voice suddenly unsure. I pulled out my phone and showed her the email I'd sent that morning, addressed to her new boss. I'd attached the entire folder, every detail of their affair, for every expense she'd tried to bury. "You think he's going to stand by you after this?" I asked. "You think he wants to risk everything he's built for someone who can't? Even be honest with her husband?" She sank back down in her chair, her face pale. "You wouldn't." "I already did," I said. "And if you're thinking about spinning this, telling him I'm just some bitter ex, remember that I have the receipts, the timeline. The proof that every word you've ever spoken to him was a lie built on a lie." Ow. For a long moment, the room was silent. I could see her chest rising and falling, her hands clenched on the table. Her mask was gone, and for the first time, I saw the fear in her eyes. I leaned in closer, my voice low. "I'm not here to ruin your life, but I am here to make sure you can't keep playing games. You made your choices now, you get to live with them." She didn't say anything. She just sat there, breathing hard, her shoulders shaking. I stood up, the weight in my chest finally starting to lift. "We're done," I said, my voice steady. "I'm done. You don't get to have me as your safety net while you chase someone else's life." As I walked out of that glass-walled conference room, I felt a strange sense of peace. The anger was still there. The hurt would probably never fully fade, but I was no longer trapped by her silence. I had turned the tables, exposed the lies, and walked away with my head held high. And as the door closed behind me, I realized that sometimes the best revenge isn't about making them hurt. It's about refusing to let them define who you are. The aftermath was swift, and in some ways more dramatic than I'd imagined. By the time I got home that evening, my phone was buzzing, non-stop emails, texts, notifications piling up one after another. The fallout had begun. She tried to call me once, just once. I watched the screen light up with her name and let it ring, until it stopped. I didn't need to hear her excuses anymore. The truth had spoken loud enough. By the end of the week, word had gotten out in her office. Her boss, her new lover, had called an emergency meeting. But Mark told me he'd been blindsided by everything I'd sent him. He wasn't just embarrassed, he was furious. Her carefully constructed image of professionalism had crumbled in the span of a day. The consulting firm she'd been working for had strict policies about relationships between senior staff and subordinates, policies she'd chosen to ignore. And when it all came out, she didn't just lose his respect, she lost her job, just like that. The same cold finality I'd felt the day I read my own termination notice. I heard she tried to spin it, to make it look like I was some unstable ex out for revenge, but she couldn't. The evidence was too clear, too damning. She was left exposed, her lies laid bare for everyone to see, and her boss, he didn't come out of it unscathed either. His own credibility took a hit. Their affair wasn't just a personal failing, it was a professional liability. Clients were wary, colleagues whispered behind closed doors. He'd gambled everything for her, and in the end, they both paid the price. As for me, there was a moment right after it all broke open when I felt a pang of something close to regret. Not for what I'd done, but for how far things had fallen. I'd loved her once, really loved her. And to see it all end in scandal and disgrace, it wasn't what I'd ever wanted. But that feeling didn't last. In the quiet that followed, I felt something else settle in its place. Relief. For the first time in months, I wasn't waiting for another shoe to drop. I wasn't staring at the ceiling at night wondering what else she'd hidden from me. The truth was out, And there was a brutal sort of peace in that. I still carried the scars, of course. Some nights I'd catch myself thinking about the way things used to be, about the life we'd built together. But those thoughts didn't hurt as much as they used to. They were just memories faded, worn, but no longer sharp enough to cut. The betrayal had nearly broken me. But in the end, it hadn't. I'd faced it head on, torn away the mask, and found a way to walk out of the wreckage with my head high. Though the pain hadn't vanished completely, I was no longer living in its shadow. In the months that followed, life began to take on a different rhythm. The chaos had faded, leaving something that felt like stillness, a quiet I hadn't realized I'd been craving all along. I found a new job, one that didn't just pay the bills but gave me a sense of purpose again. It wasn't the high-powered position I had held before, but it was honest work with people who valued integrity. There was no office politics, no hidden agendas, just a chance to start over on my own terms. My friends noticed the change in me. I wasn't the same man who'd spent nights pacing the apartment, haunted by questions I couldn't answer. I'd become someone else, someone stronger, someone who knew how to stand his ground. I started going for long walks in the evenings just to feel the world around me. There was a park near my new place, and I'd watch the sun set behind the trees, the sky painted in soft pinks and golds. Those moments felt like tiny reminders that even after the worst storms, there's a kind of beauty left behind. I took up new hobbies too. Things I'd always told myself I didn't have time for: photography, cooking real meals instead of takeout. I found comfort in those small acts of creation, in the quiet joy of making something just for me, and in that quiet, I started to realize something important. I wasn't defined by what she'd done. Her betrayal wasn't the end of my story, it was the beginning of a chapter I hadn't even known was waiting for me. I won't lie and say it was easy. There were still moments when the past tried to creep back in. When I'd see a couple holding hands on the street and feel a flicker of something raw, but those moments didn't have the same hold over me anymore. They were just reminders of where I'd been, not where I was going. I learned that healing doesn't come all at once. It comes in small steps. A new job, a long walk, a quiet night. With a book and no one to answer to, it comes in forgiving myself for the times I didn't see the signs. For the way I'd lost myself in someone else's story, I stopped blaming myself for her choices. That was her burden to carry, not mine. And in that release, found a kind of freedom I hadn't known I was missing. People always talk about moving on like it's a straight line, like you just decide one day to let go. That's it. Yeah, but the truth is, it's messier than that. It's waking up each day and choosing over and over to keep going. To keep believing that there's more to life than the worst thing that's ever happened to you. And in the end, that choice became my strength. Looking back now, I don't see a man who was defeated by betrayal. I see a man who faced it head on, who refused to let it define him. I see someone who found his voice again, who learned to trust himself more than the whispers of doubt. I know there are still scars, there always will be, but they're not something to hide. They're proof that I survived, that I kept going, even when it felt impossible. And as I stand here now, looking out at a life that's mine and mine alone, I feel something I never thought I'd feel again. Hope. Not for what could have been, but for what's still to come. For the chance to build something new on my own terms. And that, I've realized, is the greatest victory of all. Looking back on it all, I realize now that betrayal doesn't just shatter your trust in someone else, it can shatter your trust in yourself. It makes you doubt everything. Your instincts, your worth, your sense of reality. But if there's one thing this journey has taught me, it's that resilience isn't about never being hurt. It's about choosing to rise again and again. No matter how many times the world tries to knock you down, I've learned that true strength isn't loud or show yits, quiet and unwavering. It's the voice inside that refuses to be silenced, even when everything else around you feels like it's falling apart. And it's the decision to keep moving forward. Even when the past keeps pulling you back, in those long, sleepless nights when I felt like I'd lost everything, I found something I never expected. Myself. The part of me that didn't need anyone. else's validation to feel whole. The part of me that was willing to fight for the truth, no matter how painful it was. And in the end, that truth set me free. There's a kind of beauty in that, I think. Knowing that even the deepest wounds can heal, that even the worst betrayals can become the soil for something new to grow. I'm not saying it's easy. Healing never is. But it's worth it. Because on the other side of all that pain is the quiet peace of knowing you didn't just survive, you overcame. So if you're listening to this, and you've ever felt that same sting of betrayal, if you've ever wondered how you'd find your way out of the wreckage, know this: you are stronger than you think. Stronger than the lies, stronger than the hurt, stronger than the shadows of the past. You get to decide. How this story ends? You get to choose whether you'll be defined by what was done to you or by what you build in its place. And that choice, it's your power. As for me, I'm done letting someone else's choices dictate who I am. I'm done being the footnote. In someone else's story, this is my life, and I'm taking it back, one step, one breath, one day at a time. And that's the greatest truth I've found in all of this. We don't get to choose how we're broken, but we do get to choose how we heal.